Hello and a very good morning to you all. Welcome to the second session of today's jam-packed agenda. I'm Jocelyn Henry-Shaw, a change manager working within the Corporate Portfolio Office at Health Education England, and I'm really pleased to be a part of what promises to be another insightful and thought-provoking event. I'd like to pass on a big thank you from myself and the team for joining the NHS Compass 22.3 event today. Just before I hand you over to Nick Dobson, our speaker for this session, I just want to cover a couple of points about the format of the virtual event and platform. So you'll see on the right of your screen a panel detailing the chat, Q&A and feedback. Please feel free to use the chat throughout the session, sharing any comments, useful links, etc. The Q&A tab is for you to pose any questions to Nick, so please add these when they spring to mind. And finally, there will be a feedback form to complete at the end of the session. Towards the end of Nick's presentation, there will be a Q&A session whereby I'll be putting forward your questions to Nick, and those questions with the most votes will be at the top of my list. Just to give you a little bit of an introduction to Nick, he's a principal consultant at CITI Limited and has a fascination with changing behaviours which has shaped his career over the past 30 years. Nick is a highly experienced international consultant and lecturer on the topics of project, programme and change leadership and management, with an emphasis on adaptive behaviours. Arriving in project management by mistake, like so many people, Nick soon realised that the only game in town was achieving lasting change based on altering people's perceptions and mindsets. So that's enough from me. It's now my pleasure to welcome Nick. Thank you.
Jocelyn, thank you very much, and sparing me my blushes on the introduction as well. Good morning, everybody. My welcome to this session on change investment cycle, evidence-based decision-making, evaluation benefits, and in particular, changing mindsets. As Joss has already alluded to, there is a question and answer session at the end of this piece. So it'll be about 30 minutes or so of presentation, followed by 10-15 minutes of Q&A. But please feel free to pose questions as we go along. I do like to respond in real time, and it's good for you to have answers in real time. So post questions as and when they occur to you, please. The talk's essentially going to be in three quite straightforward short pieces with intersposed with some polls. And the first thing we're going to address is, if we're talking about changing mindsets, whose mindset really needs to be changed, and why does it need to be changed? In the second section, we'll look at ways in which we might change mindsets, in what direction they should perhaps be traveling. And finally, in the final section, we'll look at how you would actually go about changing those mindsets and embedding the changes before we summarize. So that's really the agenda, and what I propose to do is just crack on with it. So who might need to change their mindsets when we're talking about change investment and the investment cycle? And so stylizing an organization as three essential tiers, which is the governance structure of most organizations. We'd see an executive level. They're there to determine the strategy of the organization. It's the primary function that they fulfill. And the reason for that is the strategy sets the vision of the future, where we want to get to. And that's valuable to us. We're going to invest our effort and our resources in taking the journey in that direction. And one of the major purposes of declaring this vision of the future and declaring the value of the organization is to enable the allocation of resources, financial or human, to pursue that future goal. So really, the strategic executive level of the organization is all about setting the value set, the benefits position of the organization, and allocating the resources to enable that to be achieved. That then is fed down to a management layer, and the function of the management layer is really one of translation. They take the strategy and they translate the strategy into a number of manageable, workable enterprises, whether that's business as usual functions or change initiatives and projects that carry us towards the vision set by the executive level above. And then management are taking the allocation of resources from the executive and distributing those down at the tactical delivery level, which is where all the work actually gets done. And it again doesn't matter whether you're working in a project or a transformation type of initiative, or whether you're in service delivery, delivering healthcare or whatever the business as usual job is. The actual function at that level is creating the current and future world and delivering. Now, the slide's entitled The Changing Focus, because what you clearly see as you look at this picture is that at the top level, we have a complete emphasis on the future and why that is valuable, what the benefit of being where we expect to get to is, so that we can allocate resources. But management have a more prosaic job in terms of translating that vision of the future into the workable enterprises. So they start to focus on, so how do I allocate the resources? What pieces of work do they get engaged in? What should we do to move towards the future? And then once they've sorted that out at the management layer, that's fed into the delivery layer to execute the work. Now, at that point, there's a clear temptation for the delivery people to say, well, this is my job. This is what I'm focusing on. I'm building these products or delivering this service. And it's all about actually efficiently executing the work, not about some highfalutin vision that has been seen by the executive committee. So you can see how there might be a shift in emphasis and focus of mindsets from a value-based view of the world at the top of this pyramid down to a efficiency-based view of the world at the bottom of this pyramid. So those are the three main parties I think it's worth wondering about the mindsets of. And I want to pose the first poll at this point, because clearly this model as it's drawn has two interfaces. I've imaginatively numbered them interface 1 and interface 2, as you can see. Interface 1 being the interface between the executive and management, and interface 2 being the one between management and the delivery teams. Now, if you imagine what's happening in these interfaces, interface 1 is the executive explain the strategic vision, the benefits and the values of where we're going to management, and allocate resources downwards to them to say, go and achieve this. Management do their translation work of that and do detailed allocation of resources, precise budgets, constraints, timeframes, and so on, and allocations of work to the blue level. And then the blue level feed back their relative progress so that they can be controlled under management by the grey level, and management report back as to progress towards the vision. So that's what's happening through those interfaces. I'd like you, please, if you could, to answer the question, which, from a management perspective, is the more important of these two interfaces? Should we be focusing more attention to interface 1 or interface 2? And I'm just going to give you a few moments. I see that polling's already started on that, but if you could all submit your answers, it'd be really interesting to see what the result pans out at. So I'm going to sit quietly for a few moments whilst you hit the buttons. My patience quotient runs thin at this point in proceedings. So I know there's a slight delay between me speaking and the poll answers appearing, but we seem to be getting to a position. Am I interpreting it correctly that at the moment it looks to be about 60-30 in favour of interface 2? Cool. Okay, so we'll come back to that, but it's an interesting insight that we believe that the main interface or the main focus of management attention ought to be on interface 2 rather than interface 1, in the order of about 60-30 or 60-40 perhaps, or maybe 70-30, but a heavy preponderance on interface 2, a majority view on interface 2. We'll return to that. Those are people. Obviously, the governance structure represents the people who might need their mindsets changing. Let's just think about the investment cycle in a bit more detail. And the way I want to look at the investment cycle is by fundamentally looking at the primary instrument for most investment decisions. And that's the business case, obviously. Now, coming from where you do, you're probably all quite familiar with the 5 case model of business cases, whether you've been engaged in developing one or actually presented one yourselves, I don't know, but there are the 5 cases as represented by His Majesty's Government's Treasury. The strategic case, what is the value of this to UK PLC or to the objectives of the host organisation? Is it strategically valuable to us is the first case. And the second case is it economically valuable to us? How much bottom line profit or income does it generate, or how many good measurable outcomes that represent the value of our business does it donate, is the second case. The third case is the financial case of, have we got enough money to do it, and can we support the cash flow, and so on. So it's an affordability question on the financial case, with the fourth case being the commercial case. That is is this sufficiently attractive to the commercial market that might satisfy the need to make it appeal to them and for them to be able to wash their faces out of getting engaged in the initiative? So both financial and commercial are really about sorting out the money side of things. And finally, the fifth case is that of management. Do we have the competence and technical reach and know-how to have confidence that we'll be able to manage the enterprise? Now, it's a really good model because it forces structured thinking about why it's worth investing. Do these 5 cases balance each other out? But it's also, for a bear of little brains like me, rather a complicated model. So I think I prefer to sort of simplify it a little bit, because we can say that both the strategic and economic cases sit together because they're talking about the value and the benefits, the financial value in the economic and the strategic value in the strategic. And by that same token, you can then conflate the commercial and the financial arguments, because they're really talking about the cost component of the business case. Can we afford to do it? And then the management case is really one of, are we capable? And if we try and do it, are we likely to trip ourselves up, or do we get across the line? So coming from a slightly more commercial world, I would see these really as being the 3 main components of a business case. The benefits balanced against the costs of achieving those benefits and the risks concomitant with those costs and also concomitant with the benefits. So the business case then becomes a 3-part model rather than a 5-part model, which is a balance between benefits, costs and risks. Now, as I said, bear of simple brains, so 3 is too many pieces. What I'd sooner do is put a dotted line between these. And if you think about it now, north of that dotted line, talking about benefits, what we're really talking about is the organizational desirability of the initiative we're looking at. How much do we want it? How attractive is it to us? And how much benefit do we get from doing it? What's the payback? And then south of that line, if you take risks and costs and put them together, you're really talking about the doability. Can we afford it? And will we endure the risks of trying to achieve it? So our 5-case model is now distilled down to a balance of 2 things: our desire for it against our ability to do it. And this is where I'd like to just launch the second poll, please, which is really, as the question on the right of the screen suggests, what is the precedence of these 2? Should desirability or doability take precedence in developing our business case? And so that's the question posed in the poll, and we've already got some enthusiastic pollers jumping in there. Good to see it going up and down. Please feel free to cast your votes, and again we'll collate them in a few moments. So the graph, oh no, spoke too soon there. The graph seemed to have stabilized for a second, but it's just leaping about a bit. Marvelous. So it seems to be stabilized in very similar proportions to the previous question. We seem to have, and Jocelyn, correct me if I go wrong here, we seem to have about 40% or so suggesting desirability should take precedence, but a majority of about 60% or so suggesting that doability should take precedence. And again, really, thank you very much indeed for engaging that poll, all of you. It's an interesting insight, and I want to use it as a slight mirror holding exercise, as it were. Again, we will revisit both polls and the results in a few moments. But what we've got is a clear preponderance to look more at the costs and risks issues and the delivery issues over the benefits and the future vision issues amongst the audience as a whole, to the tune of about 60% would sooner look at the detailed issues around cost, deliverability, achievability before they look at the benefits and the value of the work we're doing. And this takes me back to the title of this. This is the investment cycle, the theme for today. And if we think about investment, The only purpose for an investment is to improve the position of the organization. That's why it's called an investment. You don't invest in things that lose you money. That's called a waste. So investment is all about making yourself better off, achieving value, achieving benefits. So if we're talking about the investment cycle, I think we ought to have a fairly clear view of to what the desirability is. And yet here we are gravitating towards doability and achievability before we consider the value. I mean, you would never work out the price of going on holiday before you've determined that you want to go on holiday, and you determine you want to go on holiday because it's valuable to you in some way. So there is a bit of mindset shift here amongst the audience that I would like to try and provoke, and that is, can we put benefits the horse in front of the cart? Why do we tend to think the way we do? And some of it is that drift we saw on the first graphic down the cascade of what we engage in and do as managers. But some of it is actually about human inclination and biases. And these are well-recognized aspects. I don't know how many of you have had the opportunity to read this book. And it is a fascinating but heavy-duty read, I have to say, if you get a chance to read it. But Daniel Kahneman wrote this book a decade or so ago now, perhaps a little bit longer. And it's an extensive examination on what biases and affects our thinking. And it does dwell on business cases to a limited extent, and proxies for them, and examines the planning fallacy and the subject of optimism bias. And I just want to spend a few minutes thinking about those. You see, the subtitle of this presentation, the evidence-based decision-making. What evidence do you have of the future? How much can you confidently and safely predict will happen? Now, we create plans to move ourselves into the future at both a strategic and a tactical level because we don't know what's going to happen and we need a comparator to control our journey against. So a plan from one perspective is an attempt to create a factual view of the future. We invest time and effort working out how much we think it'll cost, how much risk we'll encounter, and how we will actually make the journey. That planning exercise itself biases our mindset because we tend to regard what we've planned as semi-factual. That's a reality we've projected into the future. And of course it isn't, but it gives us something solid to hook onto. And that starts to guide our thinking into, so we have got control of the costs and we have got control of the risks. So we've got to be careful of this planning fallacy. We've also got to be very careful of optimism bias. Nearly all investment cases, business cases, tend to over-exaggerate the benefits and underplay the costs and risks, and thereby compromise themselves. And it's probably worth looking at why they do that. And again, the book's a rich source of information on this if it interests you. If we examine the known knowns, actual facts, as humans, we're very comfortable with that. It's exactly what we seek in terms of making decisions. And the brain is essentially lazy, is one of the central premises of this book, and jumps to a factual position, takes that as a fact, and bases a decision on the basis of that fact. So we're very happy with what we know or what we believe we know to be true, and we will make quite peculiar decisions on the basis of that. So they're good. What's not so good for us and raises a bit of a question mark is the known unknowns. Stuff we've got partial knowledge of, but there's some uncertainty in. And risks clearly fall into that category, along with lots of other things. So we'll do a limited amount of research to try and iron out as much of the uncertainty as we can and try to turn it more to a known. But otherwise, we'll write it down as a risk. And we're not so comfortable or adept at dealing with those, but we recognize them when we attempt to put mitigating things in place. What is an absolute black hole to us is the unknown unknown. You can't mitigate for this or militate against it. For heaven's sake, definitionally, we just don't know what it is and it doesn't exist. So the human mind can't cope with it. Now, if you've taken on board the planning fallacy, where we've taken some known knowns and we've also taken some known unknowns and projected a future, it's quite easy to hang your hat on the cost and risk side of the business case. It's very much harder to hang your fact on a complete conjecture of the distant future in the benefits case, the value part. So it sort of falls into this almost unknown unknown and doesn't factor into our decision making very heavily. So the real injunction here is to understand that that drift that we saw in the pyramid in the first graphic south into we have an inclination to go to the detail level and try and get comfortable with the decisions we're making there is driven by biases, constructs and mindsets that we all have. And I think we need to try and address those because these constantly trip people up in investment decision making. So that's part one, really. Jocelyn, I'm unsighted as to whether we've had any questions or not yet.
We've had a couple of comments in the chat, especially around the book. So people have got the book and found it really interesting, and others yet to read it, but I'm sure they'll definitely will after hearing this.
It's heavy going, as I say. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, so I want to move on to the second part then, really. The central tenet behind the gist of the argument in the book is this concept of CITI. What you see is all there is. Humans will make decisions quite quickly on partial information because they've only got that information. And because that's all they can see, they believe that's all that really should be factored into the decision. And so that's all they factor in. Be very, very careful of this WYSIATI phenomenon. What we've really got to do is say, that can't be all there is. Is there more we can know? Does that give us better decisions? So I'm holding the mirror up to the audience to a modest extent. There is that 60% want to play on interface 2, and they want to understand the doability before they understand the desirability of something. And I'm going to invite a little bit of reflection on that. So what changes should we make? Where should we shift mindsets to?
If I just jump in there, Nick, sorry. Just an interesting comments come in from one of the attendees who said, surely when planning, you take into consideration the worst case scenario and understand that you have to take risks to make progress, be it a positive or negative one.
And an absolutely correct comment. I mean, investment management is essentially a risk game. I mean, game is too frivolous a word, but you're absolutely right. You are trying to factor risks in, but we are very quick to move to a position that won't take in or won't research areas of risk and jeopardy that seem more uncertain. That's the central tenet of what I'm saying. You see, we've got a relatively high degree of confidence about our plan, partly because we created the plan, but we have examined what risks exist. We said if we're going to build in this environment, these risks might affect the way the build process goes. So we'll flex our product development life cycle, or we'll engage a contractor with specialisms in that area. And that's taking a risk-adjusted view of how we will conduct the build of whatever it is we're building, because that's on a shorter term planning horizon, and we've got a degree more certainty about that. Whether that building ultimately realizes its benefits position is more remote, and we'll come on to this in a little bit more detail in a second. So we're not so good at factoring in the risks towards the benefits and the future outcomes as we are the risks towards the business case cost base. And especially when the audience is focusing predominantly on the business case cost base and risk base, that lower half of the model, the doability stuff, we feel a high degree of confidence about our risk management there. And yet we hardly even countenance the risk management to the benefits piece. So I don't know if that sort of allays you. I fundamentally agree. We do have to court risk. There is no risk-free investment unless you're a bank and you get bailed out by the government. But I don't want to be too argumentative here. So let's just go on to what changes we might make in our mindsets. And one of the ways of looking at this is when you look at change initiatives, and I'm just going to take a project as a case of a change initiative. At the end of a project, we tend to try and assess, has this project succeeded or not? And it's an interesting question, because at the end of the project, about the only thing we can look at is, did it deliver what it said it would deliver? Did it deliver it within budget? And did it deliver it on time? Those cost and quality and time questions, the constraints around the project, are a major area of focus. And in fact, we control the projects against that. You can see that on the y-axis of this graphic, we're representing the amount of focus of attention placed. And we've got a very high focus of attention on time, cost, and quality, the performance of the delivery of the project. Now that really mimics that 60% of you that felt the doability question was important, because that's how efficiently we deliver the projects. The cost and risk components are a direct reflection of this time, cost and quality focus in delivery, because we're holding the project team to account for sticking within those parameters. What we're focusing less attention on is the user satisfaction. How do the people who are receiving the project's outputs interface with it? Do they end up happy and smiling and thinking, this is the best thing that's happened to us? Or do they end up disgruntled, disappointed, thinking, I don't like this and I don't want to use it? Now, because we place a very high emphasis on the time, cost and quality performance, the doability components of the business case, and we don't focus as much on the success, the desirability elements of the business case, we don't look so heavily at user satisfaction. Of course, the project team do. They'll speak to the users about their requirements and the acceptance criteria. If they're operating under agile constructs, they'll literally stand alongside them and discuss the requirements and the solutions. And all of that is aimed at developing a degree of user satisfaction, but it's still second fiddle to the time, cost and quality argument. But over time, the time, cost and quality arguments will be forgotten. We can all think of projects that have breached one of those constraints, but are still seen as successes. They're legion. And equally, you can think of projects that have lived within those constraints, delivered to time, cost and quality, and been shelfware and not succeeded at all. So perhaps we ought to shift more focus onto the value position. Do the users like it and want it? Does the business actually get benefit from it? Now, this is getting a tiny focus of attention at the closure of the project, but it was the reason for the investment. Every penny that gets invested in a project is there to achieve the benefits, the value for the business in the future. So not understanding that value, not being able to define it and determine how it's going to arise before you invest is, in many respects, folly. And of course, the benefits, the business value will be how in the long term the success of the initiative is measured. There is an even longer term measure, which is, does it leave the business in a good shape for the future? You know, Philips BV in the Netherlands developed the cassette tape, and it was a very beneficial financial success for them. But left them going down a technological rabbit warren, whilst Sony was at the same time investing in digital red technology like CDs, and left them in great shape for a strategic future. Now, look at the amount of focus we place on these different aspects of success. How clearly do we define success? I'm getting carried away. I'm burning up all the time. Let's crack along a bit. I think you must have appreciated by now that a central tenet of this discussion is around the benefits. We only invest to get benefits. So let's understand benefits first, not last, not as an afterthought to the project, but before the project starts. And this is going to be a major theme of your keynote speaker. I know Stephen will focus heavily on benefits. So benefits are the addition of value to the business, but they don't just miraculously arrive. For them to arrive, some outcomes, some impacts, some changes have got to occur in the organization. People have got to do less of one thing or more of another thing. They've got to alter their behaviors. You don't get benefits unless you get outcomes. And the way in which you achieve outcomes, and I'm sure you're all familiar with this model, is you create a set of deliverables. And the project is there to create the deliverables. Once it's created the deliverables, it closes down. That's the left-hand side of the project closure box that we've got on the left of this graphic. But at that point, we probably haven't achieved the benefits yet. But it's not until that point can you get the outcomes or the benefits to occur. So we should plan and we should write our business case from left to right of this model. The fact we deliver from right to left is just a temporal circumstance. And so it looks a bit like this in terms of the investment decision. The investment decision is that doability in blue against desirability in red, balance, but we meet the cost first. The project has to do its delivery before we can garner the benefits. This is all quite straightforward stuff. Once it has done its stuff, the team's been deployed, and obviously the team appear where the team is full when we hit the zenith of the blue curve, our maximum investments. Only once they've done their work and delivered all their products can we get the benefits, because those benefits by and large occur in business as usual. And interestingly enough, are delivered by a different set of individuals. Now, if we recognize this is the way that it goes, but our business case is there to deliver the desirability, the benefits, then what we've got to do is we've got to engage our team who are building the deliverables in understanding what the benefits need to be. And we need to sort those benefits out at the very beginning of the project lifecycle, the investment cycle as far as the project is concerned. And if they understand that the impacts their deliverables must confer, then we might be able to get to the benefits. But the team have got to buy into what the benefits are going to be and what impacts therefore need to be created. That isn't sufficient. We also need the users, the people who are going to be actually working at that blue level to deliver the benefits beyond the end of the project, to be engaged with the project at this initiation and planning stage. Now, again, Agile is a pretty good approach, certainly during the latter stages of planning and during delivery, to ensure that there is that engagement between these two groups of stakeholders. But if you want to achieve the benefits, that really must happen. And it must happen from the outset. Benefits, the desirability of the project cannot be an afterthought. We don't decide whether we can do something and then work out whether we want it. We decide what we want and then whether we can do it. And that's really what we're driving for here. Now, there are all sorts of risks within a project, and I'm grateful for the comment earlier about the risks. There are lots of risks in a project. There are risks to the deliverability of the solution set. There are technical risks within the solution set. And let's call those cost risks, because they reflect into the project's budget, those cost risks. I'm going to conduct a poll presently. So these cost risks are quite important. They affect our schedule, they affect the way we deliver the project, and they do sit in our business case under the cost heading, and they're there to factor against the risks. There are two other categories of risk. There is also benefits risk, the chance that this red line might not miraculously appear post-project. And there's also a chance, of course, that the project itself does significant damage to the business, whether or not it achieves its benefits. So we've got three categories of risk, and I want to conduct a poll here. If we looked at the top half dozen risks within your project's risk registered, would they predominantly be A, cost risks, B, benefits risks, or C, business risk? What's the major focus of attention in the risk logs that you see surrounding your projects? Cost risk, benefit risk, or business risk? Would you mind just hitting the poll on that for a second, please? Oh, this is worrying from my position because I can't see anything yet. I must have sent, oh, hello. Marvelous. Grand. Okay, so the business risk at the bottom is a slight anomaly to me in the sense that we have a preponderance still on cost risks. It's the main focus of attention for risks in risk registers within projects. The fact that they are paying a good degree of attention to the business risk is very gratifying, and from the governance perspective, excellent to see. What worries me significantly is the extent to which benefits risk features. Fundamentally, it's a very poor relation to the other two categories of risk. And yet, as I hope you're already understanding, the entire purpose behind the investment is to achieve the benefits. The benefits risks represent the main threat to the business case, not the cost risks. If you think about the ratio of benefit to cost, you could endure quite an increase in cost risk without corrupting the business case, but you can't endure very much loss, especially with optimism bias, in the benefits case before the business case implodes on itself. So in terms of where should our mindsets change, I think there are a couple of clear points here. We do need to shift our mindset to think very much more about the outcomes and the value before we think about the cost and the risk. We will spend a lot of time managing the cost and risk, and rightly so, but it is second order of importance to the value, because the investment is there to achieve the return, not to make the expenditure. And that focus on desirability means that we must be engaging the right people early on. So a last sort of topic in part two, which is, here's the project life cycle, a stylized project life cycle. And I hope you'd all recognize this. We do some initiation at the beginning of a project to decide what the project's about and whether we should do it. Then we do some planning to work out how we'll actually execute it before we execute it, and then we close the project down. This is not the investment cycle. This is the project cycle, which sits within a longer investment cycle. I mean, we've got to identify a problem that's worth investing in, or an opportunity that's worth investing in, before we run the project. So the investment cycle starts to the left of this image, and then we've got to wait to see whether we get the benefits beyond the end of the project, and that's significantly off to the right of this picture. But the business case, because it is going to underline the doability, will tell us whether or not we should invest in this. So the project life cycle is central to that investment cycle. Now, in initiation, we try and develop an outline business case. That is, we try and create this view of cost, benefit, and risk balanced against one another. But at initiation, and I want to be crystal clear here, I'm going to be quite dogmatic about it. At initiation, what we're doing is we're getting clarity on the benefits. What is the value of this piece of work to the organization? We can't yet understand the cost and risk in detail because we haven't done any planning. So we don't know what approaches we'll adopt. So we don't know what the risk profile is or the cost in detail. We can only look at those from a constraints perspective of how much would they be worth in light of the benefits we expect to get. So that initiation stage is about really understanding the benefits and the benefits case in detail. Always work out the desirability before the doability. And that desirability isn't just, do we want it? It's also very much a question of, are the people who are going to deliver those benefits bought into this world? Do they have faith in it? And will they engage in the journey beyond the end of the project? That group of people who ran across to the left in the previous graphic need to be engaged in this discussion at the outset of the project. That's fine. We get to the end of initiation with an outline business case, but it can't be a full business case, because the outline business case tells us whether it's worth investing further money in undertaking the planning exercise. That's where we actually work out in detail how we will execute the project, which tells us what the cost is, and it also clarifies the risk, and we can then also factor in the additional cost of managing those risks, the cost risks. So it's not until the end of planning we get to this full business case, and that's great, because that allows us to make the real investment decision, because it's at that point where we go from green to teal, we move from planning to actual physical delivery work, that we spend the money. So I think it's important to recognize we've got to agree the benefits with whoever is necessary, and it must be those stakeholders at the initiation stage, because unless it's genuinely desirable to the organization and genuinely achievable, you can save yourself the effort of working out the doability. Okay, but you've got to accept that's only an outline business case. Then you can move on to planning, and you can develop a full business case. You've got a mature view of how long it's going to take, how much it's going to cost, and what risks you'll manage. But, and always remember this, never lose sight of the benefits. If we at any point believe the benefits won't be forthcoming, the investment is a pure waste. It's not an investment. It's the antithesis of investment. So we've got to focus on the benefits. And that's where I think the mindset's got to shift right to the front end of the project. It's like Stephen Covey said, we should start with the end in mind. What's the benefits? And they become the lodestone for the project. That's the fundamental mindset shift we're after. Always desirability first. And that means interface one, understanding the value and the benefits, is far more important than understanding how you manage the delivery teams below you. Now, it's still important to manage those delivery teams correctly, but if they deliver stuff that doesn't give value to the organization, the investment is wasted. I'm timing out quite dramatically, so let me move on to part three at a hurry at this point. And this idea of the mindset embedding, right? I want you to come to the front of the queue, understand the benefits, and get the stakeholders impassioned by the benefits to make the investment worthwhile. There are two ways you can look at this, personally and corporately. Personally, this is just a habit thing, and it's a good habit thing. It's like brushing your teeth in the morning. You do it because it's going to preserve your teeth. It's going to make your life better in the long run. It's the right thing to do. Now, how you personally change your habits is obviously completely beyond the remit of me to speak about in the remaining 5 minutes. So let me just say, there's any amount of help out there on the internet readily available for you if you wish to change your habits. And CITI would love to engage in that journey with you. So beat a path to our door if you want to learn how to change your habits, and we'll happily help you out. Corporately, there are a few things you can think about. How you organize your meeting agendas is quite interesting, because a lot of people don't really think about the significance of the running order. But we work with a lot of big capital project investment companies, and unsurprisingly, they've got health and safety very high on their agenda. And when they say high on their agenda, they mean the first agenda item in any meeting is health and safety. Doesn't matter what the meeting is. Now, if you alter the agenda of your governance meetings or your team meetings to first and foremost discuss benefits, guess where people's mindsets drift to? So you might consider altering your meeting agendas. You might look at your business case. Oh, here's just a random business case I plucked off the internet. Look where benefits features. Third order of importance. Why isn't it top order of importance? Where does it sit in your templates? I mean, simple techniques like altering agendas and templates to aggrandize and make benefits the focus of discussion are potentially really powerful mechanisms. Project reporting, and we all report on what we've delivered, what we've built, how much money we've spent, how much budget there is remaining, our earned value analysis. It's all about the cost and risk performance and the time, cost and quality performance. How many of us actually report the proximity and probability of the benefits? Relatively modest, easy to accommodate changes that put the focus on the front end where the value is developed. So before I go into a limited question and answer session, let's just have a summarizing four final thoughts, as it were. We do need to stop looking through the wrong end of the telescope, ladies and gentlemen. Benefits and outcomes must come first. Cost and risk are important. I'm not trying to hide from that or pretend they don't matter, but they are always second order of importance. The only reason you court the cost and the risk is to achieve the benefits. So if you don't know what the benefits are, you're looking through the wrong end of the telescope. And it's not just understand them at the beginning. They must be a microscopic focus of attention across the entire delivery life cycle and beyond. For an investment case to realize what it's set out to do, the benefits must be reaped, which means they must stay under scrutiny before, during, especially during from our perspective, and also after. So there's two fundamental mindset changes I'd like to see. The third one is the early and constant engagement of the stakeholders. It's too easy to see business cases as a mathematical construct and an academic exercise in working out a future. The truth is, this all gets done by people. And if they're engaged, you might get your benefits. If they're not, you won't. No mites about it. And it is about early and constant engagement of the people who will deliver the benefits. By and large, that delivery tier in the business as usual sphere of operations, things like agile, great techniques for getting them on board and bought in. And finally, I'm indebted to dear old Winston for this. He said, if you're going through hell, best thing to do is to keep going. And the point here, and it's the same with any habit and any behavior, is you must persist. It's not just to intellectually grasp that benefits are important, it's to persist and constantly insist that they're important, that we're wasting time if we don't achieve them, and keep leaning on the problem. It won't be easy, but it will be rewarding, literally and metaphorically. So that's it in terms of what I wanted to say. It's into, I fear, an abbreviated question and answer session.
Thanks, Nick. I love your enthusiasm, to be honest, on the subject. I think it's been a great presentation, and I'm sure all the attendees have loved it too. I would really like to get this question to you, if we can squeeze the answer in. You say that the project ends when the products are delivered, but is that necessarily so? Surely you can define the scope of the project to include benefits realization stage. If not, then do you not need a benefits realization project?
Well, great question, because where you draw the limits of your project is a really important consideration. Remember, whilst the project is still open, it is itself attracting cost and risk. So it inflates the budget and inflates the amount of work that needs to be done. But if your sponsor or your business unit is prepared to fund that to guarantee they're getting the benefits, you can stay around beyond the closure of, beyond the delivery of the products to tinker with them and alter them until they're doing exactly what you need. I'm okay as long as that's a conscious investment decision. So there is a question as to where you want to draw that line in the sand. But do remember, at some point the project must close down. I mean, it is a fundamentally different management construct from a business as usual enterprise, and the majority of business as usual benefits arises in business as usual. So yes, if you've got a rationale and it holds water in the business case sense to keep the project open for an extended period to harvest benefits, do so. I've got no problem with that conceptually. Other organizations will say, right, we will have a formalized benefits review 6 months beyond the end of a project. We might then do remedial work under a separate budget if it hasn't achieved the benefits it's supposed to. You can skim the cat in whichever way you wish to, but you can't afford to not get the benefits. And if you artificially extend the project life cycle, as long as you can afford it and you can live with the risk, it is tying up valuable resource that could be seeking other benefit elsewhere. But if the benefits are that important to you, by all means. Thank you for the question. I hope that answers it adequately.
Indeed, thank you very much. I think we are short of time. I did have a couple of questions myself, but I will throw those out to you later on in the chat. We can follow up and we'll share the answers on the platform afterwards.
Excellent.
So what's left for me to say is thank you very much again, Nick. Much appreciated. I've loved your presentation. And of course, we can share that on the platform and on YouTube afterwards. So thank you very much to everybody who's attended the session. Yes. I hope you've enjoyed, and please join us again in 15 minutes. We'll be hearing from SAPBA from 2020 for an insight session. Thank you very much and enjoy the day.